Welcome back to the Opal YouTube channel. This is part two of my two-part experience with Rolex Submariners at Roldorf & Co. And we have just came off from saying that Jason, the shop owner at Roldorf, has just told me to wait there and
I can show you something really
he wanted to show me something very special. So I sat there waiting, and from the back of his office, he brought out a watch and put it in front of me. My initial impression was that it looked like a Submariner. I picked it up and I explained to him that this is a very light watch. That was my very first impression, is that it is so light compared to like my Black Bay 58, or even compared to the 16610 that I had previously just been playing with. And I was so lost because this is way beyond the territory of my knowledge when it comes to reference numbers and dates for Rolex Submariners. And the whole time I felt like a kid who was talking to his senior parent, trying to learn the nuances of the world. I first started by looking at the dial. I couldn't find anything because it was super simple. It has Swiss at the very bottom. It had Submariner and depth rating on the bottom. And then I had the Rolex logo and the crown at the top. I couldn't find anything else on the dial, and Jason told me to flip the watch around. So I did, and I saw the case back, which was completely flat. Funnily enough, it didn't have that little ridge that the current modern Submariners have that looks like this. Instead, it was just like a bubble back almost. So again, this is completely out of my range. This is something that you would see on a man and his watch, or Rolex Passion Report, or something crazy like that. So I couldn't understand anything here, and Jason threw another hint. He's like, turn it over again. So I turned it over to the case flank, and there I saw a helium escape valve. And my knowledge doesn't go that far, so I'm like, oh, the first thing I thought of is, was this dial fitted on a Rolex Sea Dweller case, or what's going on? And he's like, it is a 5514. And this just goes to show how novice I am as a Rolex collector. The first thing I thought of is okay, I've heard of 5513. I've seen one guy with it before. He's a guy locally here that fixes air-cooled Porsche 911s for a hobby. So I'm like, okay, 5513 is a very expensive watch with acrylic crystal, that I know. But I don't know what a 5514 is. Is that a hybrid Sea Dweller and a Submariner? And I had to ask Jason, my apologies, I'm into Tudors, I'm into Hydronauts and Prince Chronos. By the way, quick wristwatch check. I'm wearing the Prince Chronos 79260 that I wore to Roldorf that day. So I pretty much hey, I'm new to the hobby of collecting these vintage Rolex and Tudors. Could you tell me a little bit about this watch? So he told me the 5514 reference number Submariners were initially made for the Comex. It's a French company that specialized in underwater diving equipment and technology. This reference number was never made available for purchase for the public at retail, and it was only delivered to Comex on 3 separate occasions. People estimate there to be about 800 to 1,000 of these 5514s ever made. Now, Jason's example was a very special case. In 1974 to 1975, that's when the first batches of the Comex 5514s were first delivered to Comex. And back then, it didn't have the Comex writing on the dial. You might have seen on Instagram or some other places that people love posting these because they're so rare. And I definitely do understand why now after talking to Jason and doing a little bit of research. The 5514 used to not have Comex writing on the dial for the very first batch of delivery. And so these ones look exactly like a 5513, where it just says Submariner and the depth rating, and it's supposed to say tritium less than T25. I'll get to that in a little bit, but it's supposed to have a tritium dial bezel with a tritium, bidirectional frictional bezel, but on the side it does have that helium escape valve. Now for Jason's, he had all of those things correct, but what happened was, because he used to work at Rolex Service Center as a watchmaker, and he has a friend that worked at Rolex Service Center as a watchmaker. When this watch came into RSC, it was decommissioned by Comex. So if this watch was to ever leave RSC, it couldn't have the Comex writing on the dial anymore, and it also couldn't have the Comex case back. I haven't explained this yet, but basically with these Comex 5514s, there were Rolex and Comex and sometimes also a crown that was engraved on the case back. The earlier references I think had like those 2-3 things engraved horizontally, just straight across, and then the later ones had them like on a slight I'll throw some pictures up on the screen. I don't want to mess them up by saying too many things that I'm not super sure of just of yet. But pretty much, so when this 5514 was decommissioned by Comex, it went back to Rolex. And for this watch to end back up in the wild again, what they had to do was swap out the dial, swap out the case back, swap out the bezel. The bezel lost its tritium pip as well. But what you ended up with is a 5514 that has all replacement parts except for the case. The case is original. It still has that original helium escape valve. You can see how beat and yellow it is. I mean, it's like 50 years old, right? So of course, most of it's gonna be pretty beat compared to my standard. Like this watch is twice as old as I am, and it also features that beautiful acrylic crystal. I just love that box acrylic. Like I know it is a lot more scratch proof, and me being someone that is just frankly not as careful as I really should be with wearing my watches around, I know I'm gonna scratch it up, but I just love that box acrylic so much. This whole time I was talking to Jason, I was holding this watch in my hand and I had no idea what I had. I have no idea how rare and expensive this watch is. Like, like I couldn't fathom right now. Like when I was doing my research, it's like, wow, this watch is so rare. If you haven't had the chance yet, go look up Comex 5514 on like Chrono24 and eBay. And then if you want, you can also go look up 5514 Pre-Comex. These were the initial shipment ones from 1974 to 1975 that didn't have Comex on the dial. These were the 5513 dials fitted on the 5514. And these ones are really, really rare. I asked Jason if I could try on the watch, and he was kind enough to just say, "Yeah, go ahead." So I put it on my wrist, and first impression is it's a very beautiful watch. It's very slender compared to the 16610. I think I like the 16610's case profile a little more, just because it feels a little beefier. This one's, I think the thing to me is like the Lux integration with the case end links. This one has a female end link, so it feels like it's a little smaller. It wears a little smaller compared to the 16610. But knowing the history and knowing the rarity of this watch, this is the clear winner between the two, especially given the condition of the 16610. I wanted to get a better angle. I stood up with the watch, and I don't know if Jason would have thought like, yo, is this guy trying to run off with it? I had no idea what I had on my wrist. Like, heck, if I knew what I had in my wrist, I wouldn't even want to try it on because it's just such a rare and expensive watch. But I did that, and I got a few good pictures. I got an Instagram boomerang story as well. So thank you so much, Jason, for showing me this absolute cracker of a piece. That is the story of my very first encounter with the 5514. I don't think I'm ever gonna be able to get a hands-on with another one. Like this is just such a miracle, such a unicorn of a watch. Let me know what you guys think. Have you guys ever had hands-on with the vintage Rolex Submariner or like a vintage watch of any sort that had just blown you away completely? Or maybe you've had an experience where you got hands-on with a watch and you had no idea what you had in your hand until like much later on. Make sure to like and subscribe if you like this type of content, and I'll see you in the next one. Nice one, Odd Pal. Great vid.